Bridges in Madison County, I played a romantic kind of guy, which is really more like me than all those other characters.
Yeah.
I don't know. I never spent the night with one before.
At 95, Clint Eastwood built a legend playing the man with no name for 7 decades, the loner, the icon who needed nobody. Christina Sandera's death on July 18, 2024, cracked something open.
For saying, as I understand it, that you were having a romance with Tanya Tucker and Sondra Locke at the same time.
6 women haunt him now, not from love, but from discovery, because each one found the same devastating secret he'd been hiding since childhood. The pattern he spent his entire life running from, and what they learned, changed how they saw him forever. He couldn't even write a proper goodbye when Christina died. One line summed up 10 years together, and that's all he could manage. What were these women really running from? What did they discover that made some of them spend decades trying to escape?
Well, you can let things go by just so far and so many times.
The answer isn't what you think. July 18th, 2024, started like any other summer day in Carmel, California. By nightfall, Christina Sandera had died at 61, and Clint Eastwood faced a moment he'd avoided for 95 years. Writing something honest about someone he loved. The statement came through his publicist. Christina was a lovely, caring woman, and I will miss her very much. 13 words. That's what a decade together earned. No details about how they met in 2014 when she worked as a hostess at his Mission Ranch hotel. No mention of the 10 years she spent by his side at premieres, standing in his shadow while cameras flashed. No explanation of what she meant to him, or how she died, or why someone who'd been part of his life for so long deserved only a single sentence. Bill Brown, who'd known Clint since the 1950s, told reporters something that didn't make the official statement. Clint had called Christina the love of his life, words he'd never used publicly about any woman, not even the ones he married or the ones who bore his children. 3 weeks passed. Clint vanished from public view, turned down interview requests, and refused to elaborate. Friends who reached out got silence. The man who'd made a career playing characters who never explained themselves had become one in real life. The performance had swallowed the performer, and nobody could tell where Clint ended and the roles began anymore. What nobody saw at the time was the pattern. Christina had joined 5 other women who discovered something about Clint Eastwood that fame couldn't hide. Something that explained why every relationship in his life followed the same script, why love always felt like a performance he couldn't sustain, why the closer someone got, the faster he ran. 6 women, 6 different decades, 6 discoveries of the same truth. What they found wasn't an affair, or a scandal, or a secret family. The devastation ran deeper than that, back to 1930, back to a moment in San Francisco when a little boy learned the first rule of survival. Don't let anyone in. Don't need anyone. Don't trust that love stays. In 1953, Clint Eastwood stood at 23, broke and unknown, pumping gas and digging swimming pools to survive in Los Angeles. Maggie Johnson had just turned 22, a college student from Berkeley with a future that didn't include struggling actors.
Well, it was a terrible thing, and it's not much fun. It's bad enough to...
They met on a blind date in the Bay Area. 6 months later, they married, and the performance of his life began. Marriage was what successful men did. That's what Clint understood from watching his father, Clinton Sr., a man who dragged the family through the Depression working factory jobs and never talking about feelings. Love wasn't something you felt, it was something you performed. You showed up, you provided, you stayed. The actual connection, the emotional intimacy, the vulnerability, none of that appeared in the script. Maggie learned the rules fast. Clint disappeared for days during filming, came home when he felt like it, kept entire sections of his life locked away from her. She accepted it because that's what wives did in 1953, and because rejecting it meant admitting the marriage had failed. meant walking away from the image of Clint Eastwood's wife, meant starting over with nothing. The affair with Roxanne Tunis started in 1959 while Clint filmed Rawhide. Maggie found out years later. Not from Clint confessing or from guilt eating at him until he broke, but from whispers on set, from script supervisors and makeup artists who saw Roxanne showing up with a daughter who had Clint's eyes. 14 years that affair lasted, running parallel to the marriage, like two separate films being shot simultaneously, and Clint moved between them without breaking character. Maggie stayed through it. Stayed through Sondra Locke in the 1970s. Stayed through public humiliation and private devastation. Stayed until 1984, when divorce became the only option left, when even the performance couldn't hold anymore, when 31 years of marriage officially ended, and Clint wrote a check for $25 million to make the dissolution as clean and emotionless as everything else in their relationship had been. Friends from that era remember Maggie describing marriage to Clint as living with a ghost. He occupied the same space but remained unreachable, spoke words that meant nothing, went through motions without feeling them. She'd spent 3 decades trying to reach something human inside him, and all she'd found had been the roles he played, the characters who couldn't love because loving meant weakness, meant giving someone power to hurt you, meant trusting that they'd stay. Maggie Johnson taught Clint Eastwood that marriage could be survived the same way he'd survived childhood. Show up. Warm. Keep the real parts hidden. Don't let anyone see the wound. Roxanne Tunis met Clint in 1959 when she worked as a stuntwoman on Rawhide. She turned 30 that year, already divorced, already understood that Hollywood didn't give women second chances. Clint offered something different for marriage. He offered the parts of himself Maggie never got. The late-night conversations. The vulnerability that came out when cameras stopped rolling. The version of Clint who could almost pretend he knew how to connect. 14 years, they sustained it. Roxanne gave birth to Kimber in 1964, Clint's second child, though the world didn't know it. He kept Roxanne and Kimber separate from his public life, separate from Maggie, separate from the image of Clint Eastwood that studios sold to audiences. Roxanne accepted the terms because accepting them meant keeping him, and keeping him mattered more than having all of him. But here's what nobody knew until later. Roxanne spent those 14 years watching Clint repeat the same pattern with her that he'd established with Maggie. The disappearances, the emotional distance, the way he'd open up just enough to make her believe she'd reached something real, then slam the door shut when she got too close. She'd thought being the secret woman made her special, made her different from the wife, gave her access to parts of Clint that Maggie never touched. The truth hit harder. Roxanne had the same access as everyone else. None at all. She had his body when he showed up, had his words when he felt like talking, had his money for Kimber's expenses. She didn't have him. Nobody did. The man didn't exist outside the roles he played, and Roxanne had been cast as the understanding mistress in a production that would run until Clint found someone new to play opposite. The affair ended in 1973 when Sondra Locke entered the picture. Clint moved on without explanation or apology. Roxanne got silence, same as Maggie got silence, same as everyone who tried to love Clint Eastwood eventually got. The relationship dissolved like it had never existed, and Kimber grew up with a father who sent checks but rarely showed up, who played the role of dad during scheduled visits but never committed to the part fully. Roxanne Tunis died on June 4, 2023, at 93 years old. The obituaries mentioned her stunt work, her daughter, her career. They didn't mention Clint. The 14 years they'd spent together earned less space in her official story than her work on Rawhide, and maybe that was fitting. Maybe that's all it had ever been. A job. A role. A performance that fooled her into thinking she'd found the real man underneath. Friends from that era say Roxanne never spoke badly about Clint, never complained publicly, never demanded more than he offered. She'd learned the same lesson Maggie learned. Clint Eastwood didn't change for anyone. You either accepted the performance or you left. Roxanne accepted it for 14 years. Then Clint wrote her out of the script. In 1975, Clint met Sondra Locke on the set of The Outlaw Josie Wales. Sondra had just turned 31, fresh off an Oscar nomination, talented enough that studios wanted her. Clint stood at 45, still married to Maggie, still seeing Roxanne occasionally, still playing the man who needed nobody. Sondra saw something different. She saw pain underneath the performances, saw the little boy who'd learned to survive by never trusting anyone, and she thought love could heal it. They moved in together while Clint remained legally married, made 6 films together over the next decade. To the outside world, they looked like partners, equals, collaborators who understood each other creatively and personally. Sondra thought she'd finally found a man who could commit even if he couldn't quite bring himself to divorce his wife and make it official. But something else had been happening behind the scenes, something Sondra wouldn't discover until the relationship imploded. Clint had been sabotaging any possibility of real intimacy from day one, ensuring that Sondra could never have the one thing that might have made their relationship real. And children. Sondra wanted to direct. She had talent that went beyond acting, vision that could have made her a major filmmaker. She spent years developing projects, writing scripts, pitching to studios. Clint supported her publicly, encouraged her, told her she had his backing. Behind the scenes, he made phone calls, told studio executives she wasn't ready, suggested they pass on her projects, quietly killed every opportunity she had to step out of his shadow and become her own person. The pregnancy came in 1977. Sondra discovered she'd gotten pregnant and told Clint. His response came cold and immediate. Get an abortion. She did. The pattern repeated in 1978. Another pregnancy. Another abortion. Sondra complied because she thought temporary sacrifice would lead to permanent commitment. Thought that, once Clint felt secure enough, once he trusted her completely, they'd start a family together and build something real. Then came the revelation that shattered everything. While Clint pressured Sondra into 2 abortions, while he told her they weren't ready for children, while he convinced her to sacrifice her own body and future for their relationship, he'd been having an affair with Jacelyn Reeves, a flight attendant he'd met in 1984. A woman young enough that she looked at Clint Eastwood and saw a legend instead of a man. Jacelyn gave birth to Scott in 1986, Clint's 7th child, though most people had lost count by then. Catherine followed in 1988, 2 children with Jacelyn, while Sondra recovered from her 2nd abortion, while she believed they had an agreement, while she thought the sacrifice meant something. But here's where the cruelty reached levels that still shock people who know the full story. In 1989, Sondra needed surgery for endometriosis, a painful condition affecting her reproductive system. She woke up from the procedure to discover Clint had convinced her doctor to perform a tubal ligation while she remained under anesthesia. He'd had her sterilized without her knowledge or consent, permanently ending any possibility of her having children with him or anyone else. Sondra found out months later when she tried to conceive with a new partner after leaving Clint. The doctors told her what had been done, told her the procedure hadn't been medically necessary, told her someone had signed the consent forms in her name. The pieces came together fast after that. The abortions, the affair with Jacelyn, the 2 children Clint fathered while ensuring Sondra could never have any, the systematic destruction of her reproductive future while he built a family with someone else. April 10, 1989. Sondra came home to the house she'd shared with Clint for 14 years. The locks had been changed. Her belongings sat in storage. Clint had locked her out, literally and metaphorically. Erased her from his life the way he'd erased Roxanne and Maggie and everyone else who'd gotten too close. No conversation. No explanation. No acknowledgement of the 14 years they'd spent together, or the 2 pregnancies he'd forced her to terminate, or the sterilization he'd authorized without her knowledge. The lawsuit came next. Sondra sued for palimony, for the career he'd destroyed, for the children he'd stolen from her. Clint's lawyers fought back hard, offered her a production deal at Warner Bros. As settlement, a 3-year contract that would finally let her direct. Sondra accepted, thinking she'd at least salvage her career from the wreckage of the relationship. The deal turned out to be fraudulent. Warner Bros.
Mariana Koch, who was the German actress who was in the film, and
had never intended to produce her projects. Clint had paid the studio to create a fake contract to give Sondra the illusion of opportunity while ensuring she'd never work again. Every pitch got rejected. Every script died in development. The 3 years passed with nothing to show for them, and Sondra finally understood the full scope of what Clint had done. He hadn't just ended the relationship. He'd destroyed her career, her body, her future, and her trust in her own judgment. Sondra Locke died alone on November 3, 2018, at 74 years old. The obituaries mentioned her Oscar nomination, her 6 films with Clint, the lawsuit that made headlines. They didn't mention the abortions, or the sterilization, or the way Clint Eastwood had systematically dismantled every part of her life that didn't serve his needs. Those details came out later, in court documents and depositions, and statements from people who'd watched the relationship from the inside. Friends from that era say Sondra never fully recovered, never directed another film, never had children, never trusted another man completely. Clint had taken 14 years of her life and left her with nothing but trauma and the knowledge that the man she'd loved had never existed outside her imagination. Jacelyn Reeves met Clint in 1984 when she worked as a flight attendant. She turned 29 that year, young enough that Clint's fame impressed her, old enough that she should have known better. The affair started fast, ran hot, produced 2 children before most people knew it existed. Scott arrived in 1986. Catherine followed in 1988. Both birth certificates listed the father as declined. Clint's way of keeping his private life separate from his public image. His method of ensuring that Jacelyn and the children remained hidden from view. He provided financially, but avoided the messier parts of fatherhood, the emotional labor, the daily presence, the vulnerability that comes from letting children see who you really are. Jacelyn accepted it because what choice did she have? Fight Clint Eastwood in court? Demand recognition from a man who'd spent his entire life avoiding emotional accountability? She took the money, raised the children, and watched Clint move on to other women while pretending Scott and Catherine didn't connect back to him. The relationship ended in 1990 when Frances Fisher appeared. No conversation, no explanation. The pattern repeated perfectly. Clint moved from woman to woman the way he moved from film to film, and Jacelyn became another name on a list of people who'd thought they meant something special to him. But here's what makes Jacelyn's story different from the others. She never sued, never went public with details, never wrote a tell-all book, or gave interviews about her years with Clint. She protected his privacy even after he'd discarded her, kept his secrets even after he'd moved on, maintained the performance of discretion that he demanded from everyone who got close to him. Scott and Catherine grew up knowing Clint as an absence more than a presence. He showed up occasionally, sent gifts on birthdays, paid for education and housing. He didn't provide guidance or wisdom or the emotional foundation children need from fathers. He gave them the performance of fatherhood without the substance, the same thing he'd given Kimber, the same thing he gave everyone. Jacelyn Reeves taught Clint that even motherhood couldn't guarantee commitment. Even bearing his children twice couldn't make him stay. Even keeping his secrets and protecting his image couldn't earn her a permanent place in his life. She'd served her purpose, produced 2 children who carried his genetics but not his name, and then stepped aside when the next woman arrived. The cruel irony hits hardest here. While Jacelyn carried Scott and Catherine, while she gave Clint the family he'd denied Sondra, he authorized Sondra's sterilization to ensure she could never compete for his attention. Jacelyn got the children. Sondra got surgery. Both got abandoned. The only difference stood in timing, and timing only mattered to Clint's convenience. Frances Fisher entered Clint's life in 1990 on the set of Unforgiven. She brought intelligence, talent, and the belief that Clint Eastwood at 60 might finally be ready to evolve. Might have learned something from the wreckage of his previous relationships. might be capable of genuine connection now that age had softened his edges. They dated for 5 years. Frances got pregnant in 1992. Francesca arrived in August 1993, Clint's 8th child, and for a moment, it looked like something might be different this time. Clint seemed present, seemed engaged, seemed like he might actually commit to building something real with Frances and their daughter. The reality unfolded slower, but just as devastating. Clint could perform fatherhood for a newborn, show up for photo ops, and play the proud dad role. The problems surfaced when Francesca started developing a personality, when she needed more than financial support, when being her father required emotional availability instead of just writing checks. Frances watched it happen in real time, watched Clint pull away as Francesca grew, watched him retreat into the same patterns that had destroyed every other relationship in his life. She tried everything, gave him space when he needed it, pushed for connection when withdrawal seemed dangerous, adjusted her expectations, lowered her standards, convinced herself that partial presence beat total absence. It didn't work. In 1995, Clint ended the relationship. Francesca turned 2 years old, and Frances found herself joining the long line of women who'd thought they could be the one to reach him, the one to heal the wound, the one to make Clint Eastwood trust that love could stay. Years later, in a rare moment of honesty, Frances described Clint in a way that captured the pattern perfectly. She said Clint didn't sabotage relationships out of meanness, but out of panic. That he didn't know what to do when someone loved him, so he destroyed it before it could destroy him. That insight cuts deeper than anger or resentment. Frances had seen the truth that Maggie and Roxanne and Sondra and Jacelyn all eventually discovered. Clint Eastwood ran from love because love meant vulnerability, meant trusting someone to stay, meant believing you deserved connection. Somewhere in his childhood, he'd learned the opposite lesson. People leave. Love ends. Trust gets punished. Better to be alone than to risk the devastation of abandonment. Frances Fisher proved that even clarity about the pattern couldn't break it. Even understanding where the wound came from couldn't heal it. Even loving someone enough to see past their defenses couldn't make them lower those defenses. Clint remained trapped in a cycle he couldn't escape, and Frances became another casualty of his inability to trust that anything good could last. Francesca grew up with a father who existed mostly in absence, same as Scott and Catherine and Kimber before her. The performance of fatherhood, but not the substance. Clint had created 8 children with 5 different women, and not one of them could say they truly knew him. In 1996, Clint Eastwood married Dina Ruiz. She turned 31. He turned 66. 35 years separated them, and everyone could see the pattern repeating before the ceremony even happened. But Dina thought she'd be different. Thought youth gave her an advantage. Thought a second marriage meant Clint had finally learned from his mistakes. They had Morgana that same year, Clint's 8th child, though some sources suggest others existed that never made it into public record. The marriage looked functional from the outside. They appeared together at events, raised Morgana in Carmel, built a life that resembled normalcy if you didn't look too close. The cracks showed up in 2012 when Dina launched a reality show called Mrs. Zest, Eastwood and Company. The show documented her life, her daughter's life, her stepdaughter Francesca's attempts at a music career. Clint appeared occasionally, but mostly stayed in the background, uncomfortable with cameras invading his private space, resistant to the exposure that Dina seemed to crave. Friends from that era described the marriage as a negotiation that never quite balanced. Dina wanted recognition, wanted to be seen as more than just another of Clint's wives, wanted her own identity separate from his shadow. Clint wanted the same thing he'd always wanted. Someone who showed up when convenient and disappeared when he needed space. Someone who performed the role of wife without demanding the vulnerability that comes with actual intimacy. The divorce filing came in 2013. 17 years of marriage officially ended, and the details that emerged painted a picture of a relationship that had been dying for years. Dina had fallen in love with someone else, a high school friend who'd re-entered her life and offered something Clint never could. Emotional availability. Genuine connection. The sense that love meant more than just showing up occasionally and providing financial security. But here's where the story gets complicated. Court documents revealed Dina hadn't been the only one having an affair. Clint had been seeing other women throughout the marriage, maintaining the same patterns that had defined every relationship since Maggie. Multiple partners. Emotional distance. The performance of commitment without the reality of it. The settlement came fast. Clint paid the money, signed the papers, and moved on without looking back. Dina got the house, got support from Morgana, got her freedom from a marriage that had been suffocating her for years. She'd spent 17 years trying to reach a man who'd spent 95 years perfecting the art of being unreachable. Dina Ruiz taught Clint that even a second marriage couldn't break the pattern. Even trying again at 66 couldn't heal the wound. Even having another child couldn't make him trust that love stays. The little boy from San Francisco still controlled everything, still ran from connection, still believed that letting anyone in meant giving them the power to destroy him. Christina Sandera met Clint in 2014 when she worked as a hostess at his Mission Ranch Hotel in Carmel. She turned 51. He turned 84. 10 years together followed, the longest relationship Clint had sustained since his first marriage to Maggie, and the quietest. Christina never spoke to press, never gave interviews, never posted on social media, or tried to capitalize on being Clint Eastwood's partner. She showed up at premieres when he needed a date, stayed home when he needed space, and accepted the terms of a relationship with a man who'd spent his entire life avoiding emotional intimacy. Friends who knew them describe Christina as understanding, patient, and completely aware of what she'd signed up for. She'd watched Clint's pattern from the outside before entering it, knew about Maggie and Roxanne and Sondra and Jacelyn and Frances and Dina. Knew that loving Clint Eastwood meant accepting that he'd never fully love you back. That connection would always remain partial. That the wound from his childhood had never healed and never would. She accepted it anyway, gave him 10 years, died at 61 without demanding more than he could give. Bill Brown, Clint's longtime friend, claimed Clint called Christina the love of his life. But Clint never said those words publicly, never gave her the recognition she'd earned, never broke character long enough to admit that maybe, finally, someone had reached him. Or maybe not. Maybe Christina was just the last woman to try and fail. Maybe the love of his life was just another performance. Maybe nothing had changed at all. 6 women, 6 decades, 6 discoveries of the same truth. Clint Eastwood couldn't sustain intimacy because intimacy required trust, and trust required believing that people stay. Somewhere in his childhood, he'd learned the opposite lesson, learned it so deeply that 95 years of life couldn't unlearn it. Every relationship followed the same script. Initial attraction, period of closeness where Clint opened up just enough to create hope. Gradual withdrawal as the woman got too close. Final abandonment when staying became more terrifying than leaving. The details changed. The women changed. The circumstances changed. The pattern never did. Maggie got 31 years of performance. Roxanne got 14 years of secrets. Sondra got 14 years of sabotage and sterilization. Jacelyn got children without commitment. Frances got clarity without connection. Dina got a second marriage that repeated all the failures of the first. Christina got 10 years of patience that earned her 13 words when she died. What did they all discover? That Clint Eastwood had mastered the art of being present while remaining completely absent. That fame and success and talent couldn't fill the hole left by childhood abandonment. That you can't love someone into healing if they refuse to believe healing exists. That the man with no name wasn't just a role. It was who Clint had become to survive, and survival had cost him the ability to truly live. The wound started with Ruth Wood, Clint's mother. She didn't beat him or abuse him or do anything that would make headlines. She simply couldn't connect. Couldn't provide the emotional foundation children need. Couldn't make young Clint feel safe, or wanted, or loved unconditionally. Clinton Sr., Clint's father, worked factory jobs through the Depression, dragged the family through poverty, taught his son that men don't talk about feelings or show vulnerability or need anyone. Ruth reinforced the lesson by being physically present but emotionally absent, there in body but unreachable in spirit. Clint learned early that loving someone meant risking abandonment. Better to need nothing. Better to perform connection without feeling it. Better to be the one who leaves first than to experience the devastation of being left. The little boy who pumped gas and dug swimming pools and clawed his way to stardom never forgot those lessons, never healed from the absence of maternal love, never learned that trust could be safe. Ruth Wood died in 2006 at 97 years old. Clint attended the funeral, performed grief appropriately, said the right things to the right people. Nobody knows what he actually felt. Nobody knows if he ever confronted her about the emotional neglect or if he just accepted it as normal because accepting it hurt less than acknowledging the damage. The wound she left became the wound he inflicted on everyone who loved him. Ruth couldn't give him security, so Clint couldn't give security to anyone else. The pattern passed down perfectly, and 8 children plus 6 major relationships paid the price. At 95, Clint Eastwood stands alone in his Carmel home, surrounded by Oscars and memories and the wreckage of relationships he couldn't sustain. 8 children who barely know him. 6 women who discovered his secret and either stayed too long or left too late. 95 years of running from the thing he needed most. Friends who still talk to him describe a man finally understanding what he lost. Finally seeing that the armor he built to protect himself became a prison that locked everyone else out. Finally recognizing that Ruth's inability to love him didn't mean he was unlovable, didn't mean connection always ends in abandonment, didn't mean trust always gets punished. But understanding comes too late. Maggie remarried, built a life without him. Roxanne died never knowing if the 14 years meant anything. Sondra died alone, destroyed by what he'd done to her. Jacelyn raised his children without him. Francis moved on. Dina found love with someone capable of giving it. Christina died before he could tell her what Bill Brown claimed he felt. The confession lives in that 13-word statement about Christina. I will miss her very much. Such simple words. Such inadequate words. Such honest words from a man who'd spent 95 years hiding behind performances and roles and the mythology of the man with no name. Clint Eastwood wasted his life running from love because a little boy learned that loving meant losing, and the man never unlearned what the boy discovered. There's a letter in Clint's desk that he's never opened. Christina wrote it months before she died, left it for him to find, sealed it in an envelope with his name written on the front in her handwriting. He knows it's there, knows what it probably says, knows opening it means confronting 95 years of running, means admitting that the woman who gave him 10 years of patience deserved more than 13 words, means facing the possibility that he destroyed the one relationship that might have saved him. The letter sits unopened because opening it means breaking character, means dropping the performance that's kept him safe since childhood, means trusting that reading her words won't destroy what's left of him.
Image of the characters I play come out.
At 95, Clint Eastwood still can't take that risk, still can't trust that love survives honesty, still can't believe that vulnerability leads anywhere except abandonment. What would Christina's letter say? Maybe she forgave him for the distance. Maybe she understood that his inability to connect came from wounds he didn't create. Maybe she wanted him to know that loving him hadn't been a mistake, even though he couldn't love her back fully. Maybe she just wanted to tell him goodbye properly, since she knew he wouldn't be able to do it himself. Or maybe the letter says what Sondra and Maggie and Roxanne and all the others wanted to say, but couldn't. That Clint Eastwood wasted his gifts, wasted his life, wasted every opportunity for genuine connection because he let fear win. That the man with no name wasn't strength, it was cowardice. That running from love isn't protecting yourself, it's destroying yourself slowly over 95 years until nothing real remains. The envelope sits in the desk. Clint won't open it. Can't open it. The performance continues, even when there's nobody left to perform for. Even when the only person he's fooling is himself. Even when 95 years of evidence proves that the armor doesn't protect, it just isolates. Clint Eastwood's story isn't about fame or success, or Oscars, or the dozens of films that made him a legend. His story stands as a warning about what happens when childhood wounds never heal, when fear controls every decision, when the need to protect yourself becomes the thing that destroys you. 6 women discovered his secret. Love terrified him more than any villain he ever faced on screen. The tragedy isn't that he couldn't love them back. The tragedy is that he never learned he was worth loving in the first place. Have you ever pushed away someone who tried to love you? Have you built armor so thick nobody can reach you? Have you let fear turn you into someone you don't recognize? Clint's story forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about the walls we build and the price we pay for keeping everyone out. If this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe for more untold Hollywood stories. There are more legends like this, more secrets hiding behind fame, more truths that need telling. Thank you for watching.